Day 1272 of the war. In Washington, Zelensky will meet with Trump today and then the President of the United States with European leaders. On the background of this, Trump is storming and postings on social networks like his team, which gives an interview to the right and to the left. The pressure on Kyiv from the side of the US has already begun. So far, the sluggish Trump directly calls on Zelensky to accept Putin's deal, but does not specify publicly what is included in it. Putin's 6-year-old Witkoff even states that Russia will go into unseen generousness and, as a bribe, will refuse to capture all Ukraine. Meanwhile, DeepState provides data showing that Russia has occupied less than 1% of Ukraine's territories over the past years. And to capture that territory by means of war, something Trump apparently wants to simply give to Putin, takes years if the bug doesn't untangle earlier, and that's quite possible. Meanwhile, Trump's ability to pressure Ukraine is quite limited, not only by objective parameters, since the US has brought together many Kyiv support programs, but also by dealings with Europeans and the own citizens. More on the situation before the meeting in the White House. In a minute, Ukrainian military continue to confirm their success in eliminating the Russian breakthrough. The fighters showed a cleared settlement of Zolotyy Kolodyaz. Also, the Azovets published footage of the Russian assault stop Katerynivka, while Konstantin Mashovets describes the situation on the front. From most directions, Russia does not manage to achieve success if it were to provide serious movement. Forward, Zetnik Grubnik complains that the state is fooling the population, trying to pretend everything is going well. In reality, according to him, the situation is getting worse and worse, both with the economy and with the army. A deputy from Krasnoyarski Krai, a participant of the SVO, a veteran of combat actions, wrote an appeal in which he complained that he was not allowed to hold a meeting about the problems of the servicemen at the front. The authorities were covered by COVID restrictions, remember these. The deputy is outraged by such a relationship, but he is waiting for many more surprises, since the real attitude of the Russian authorities to the military is very different than what is said on TV. We will talk about this in today's latest report, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions. They are important for YouTube algorithms. You can support the channel financially on Patreon. The link is in the description, or by purchasing NVPN, a means to bypass restrictions that allow you to bypass restrictions. You can actually use YouTube at full speed, Twitter, Instagram, call on Telegram, and WhatsApp. In short, it is normal to use the internet. If you want to support the release of new videos and have normal access to the network, then NVPN is your choice. The link is in the description. In Russia, it is still legal to buy and use VPNs when, if something will change, we will definitely let you know. Well, now we are moving on to what happened in the past day. Before Trump met with Zelensky and Western leaders, he started an extensive media warming campaign, which, in fact, is an attempt to force Kyiv to hand over the territory. And not only him, Marco Rubio, for example, gave 4 interviews. Pete Witkoff also said some nonsense. The White House administration really wants to sell the idea that they are doing something good, while absolutely all the media and many public figures are sure of the opposite. Before moving on to what they said there, I will say the context again, which I see and which seems important to me. So Vodny, Trump didn't care about Ukraine or Russia. Moreover, Putin, like all dictators, likes Russia very much. He wants to share the world with Russia. Moreover, he has even a small vision. Why does he need it? The main threat to the US and to the country's interests, he sees China. The war in Ukraine has made Russia a complete Chinese wasp because Putin depends on Xi Jinping a bit more than completely. He depends economically since China buys Russian oil. He depends militarily since China supplies drones and missiles to Russia. Some things directly, some as bypass sanctions pass through Chinese companies. Well, it depends on the policy since China-Russia is a couple. Only China has international weight. Trump's global idea is to become friends with Russia and withdraw it from China's orbit. The idea is impossible to achieve since Moscow is completely under the control of Beijing. Nevertheless, that's his idea. Because of that, Trump doesn't perceive war in Ukraine as something important. It seems like a small episode to him. Trump is not obsessed with intelligence or a morale compass. He's honestly shocked by all this time and believes that Putin is continuing to break Frontline for Ukraine. That's the first frame, the international one. The second frame concerns Trump himself. First and foremost, he cares about himself and his ego. Therefore, for him, this ongoing war is a tough blow to himself, as he promised to end it quickly. At the same time, not everyone is pleased with him. Magician Trump is pleased that the President of the United States still hasn't given Ukraine full control. Republicans not part of the magician movement are pleased that Trump is not pressing on Putin. America itself does not like Putin at all and is supporting Ukraine, so it's not quite president-like either. Meanwhile, Trump's supporters among the population are a magician trumpet picker. In principle, his supporters are obsessed with the fact that Trump looks weak and crams like crap in the break-in without any real result. The best characteristic of his behavior in recent days is the well-known military analyst Deathman. He wrote the following: Trump has a crisis of confidence in himself, probably due to his failure in Alaska. His schedule is currently just insane. He has months to close his eyes on other people and to boast of himself. And that, in my opinion, is very close to reality. Trump made a big bet on Alaska and he even wrote high bets on it himself. But he hasn't achieved anything. That's why now he's actively striking from the outside so he can give at least something as a result. Again, to understand Trump's actions and attempts, you have to understand that he wants to end the war under any conditions, absolutely any. He does not care about any territories at all, justice and international security. So seeing that officially Putin's new proposal has fewer demands, he got hold of this chance, the chance it seems to him, and is trying to push Ukraine toward accepting it. He of course won't accept it because Putin's proposal is still a proposal for capitulation, at least not in the form that's known at the moment. The question here is what the US president will do when Ukraine and Europe clearly understand that they are not ready for Putin's proposal in this form. First, he will be sure that Ukraine and Europe can be suppressed. That's exactly what he will do, moving forward from evil to action, stopping supplies, cutting off Starlink supplies, refusing to exchange intelligence. If he understands that Ukraine cannot be crushed, there will again be a choice, either to push Russia, as he promised for the past 1.5 months, or to refuse any effort. Here's an example of the status quo I see in him. The status before Trump's meeting in Washington, as well as a joint meeting with European leaders. The most heavyweight team is expected for this meeting, the Merch, Europe's main force. The president of Finland, Stubb, who plays golf with Trump and tells him who Putin and Russia really are. The prime minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, who also has good relations with Trump and who is his fan. The secretary general, Marco Rutte, who called Trump a papachka. And finally, the starmer Macron and FUNDRAISING. I don't think FUNDRAISING is more than enough for Trump to yearn for, and Macron is the one who not so long ago pissed the whole establishment off, saying France would announce Palestine a state, making the US and Israel's talks with the terrorist Hamas worse for the country. But still, if we lag behind current realities and look at the historical perspective, how the hell is the whole of Europe going to conspire with Trump to lie to Putin's aggressor? Insanity, absolutely. But of course, there's some kind of progress for humanity, because just under 100 years ago, Europe would negotiate with the aggressor itself, giving the countries to him for formation in 1938. But progress, to put it mildly, is very slow and scaring. And before we move on with the analysis of the statements of Trump's team and Trump himself, and with no conclusion at all about what to expect, I'll remind you, for now, everyone's watching all this nonsense about Alaska and all that doesn't matter at all. All of it is unpleasant, horrific, distorted, but it has nothing to do with what's happening. The only thing that has to do with what's happening is what's happening on the battlefield. To help Ukraine fight Russian aggression and the Russian soldiers who came to kill them, you need to support the Ukrainian army, which is something we regularly do, and thank you very much for that. But the needs of the Ukrainian army continue to remain quite high, which is why we continue this meeting. And we're continuing it for Horud, for scouts from Horud at the UAVs. Let me remind you of their military appeal to you. I wish you good health. We are a unit of Horud. We ask for support and help from subscribe to Michael Nacke's Telegram and YouTube channels. We work in Donbass and are destroying the enemy. With your help, we will destroy even more. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine, glory to Horud. Here is the QR code for Monobank in the description. PayPal, USDT, TRC20, cryptocurrency. Cryptoshakes are always glad like everyone else. Thank you very much to everyone who supports the Ukrainian forces. It is the only thing that matters here and now. They are now facing very heavy pressure from Russia, because Russia, seeing that Trump is bowing to them, is trying to pressure the front even more. In order for Trump to focus on Putin and the situation on the front, to say, here, Ukraine, look, everything is bad, surrender. But as you can see, the breakthrough in the Pokrovsk direction is already ready, and in general, the situation on the battlefield does not tell at all about the fact that Ukraine has some kind of collapse of the front, or that tomorrow Russia will be in Kyiv or at least in Slavyansk. Absolutely not. But in order for the Ukrainian forces to have more opportunity to protect their country, their relatives and loved ones themselves in the end, they are very important to them, is our support. Therefore, all the links are in the description. Your support to the Ukrainian military, which I also join, also participate in each fundraising with my own personal funds, is what literally helps to save lives and fight Russian aggression. But let's go back to our rascals, that is, to the Trump administration, the most pitiful administration in the history of the existence of America. I will not bring to you all the information madness that came out yesterday. Let's move on to the mess of the main actors. Let's start with the Putin beep, Witkoff. He again repeated the concession that Russia agreed on. According to him, this concession is not to capture all of Ukraine. A good concession is cool. I can go to Witkoff's concession and in exchange for Trump giving me 3 or 4 US states, write a paper that I will not capture the rest of America. I hope you will see that in the near future, and I not only mention the paper. Witkoff says that Ukraine's security guarantee will be in the fact, get more air into your chest, as Zadornov would say, that Putin will write to the lawyer that he will not attack Ukraine and Europe. Here, of course, the Kremlin is using the fact that Trump and Witkoff are degenerates, in the sense that Russia has already given the written responsibility to not attack Ukraine, and then gave 100,000 deep duties. You know what it is? Moreover, in the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, there is currently Article 353, which follows. The Russian Armed Forces Article 353 of the Criminal Code, plans, training, unleashment, or the introduction of an aggressive war. First, plans, training, or the introduction of an aggressive war is fined for depriving Ukraine of freedom for a period from 7 to 15 years. Second, plans, training, or the introduction of an aggressive war is fined for depriving Ukraine of freedom for a period from 10 to 20 years. So, as I have said many times, Vladimir Putin and his comrades are criminals by Russian laws, and any policeman has the right to detain them. And when there is resistance, open the fire for defeat. So the paper is a guarantee in the terminology of Witkoff that Russia will not attack Ukraine and other countries are already there. Putin just beep on it. As in the Budapest Memorandum, by which Russia guarantees that it will not attack Ukraine, there is no longer any kind of abstract. It specifically says that it will not attack Ukraine to claim territorial integrity, specifically Ukraine. By the way, the United States and the UK are also guarantees there. Guess it worked or not. Why am I emphasizing the attention of the Witkoff? It is this degenerate who is the lawyer. Putin and Trump's team is responsible for lobbying Putin's perception of the world in the head of Donald Trump. This isn't a story about the Tsar being good and the boyars being bad. The Tsar is beep, the boyars are beep, everything is beep in this administration. It's just a catastrophic administration. Well, skipping Rubio, who turned like a fly yesterday into the breeze, giving an interview to everyone in turn, and everywhere is opposition to everything, let's move immediately to Trump. He immediately issued a lot of various posts. This is incredible how fake news harshly destroys the truth when it comes to me. Nothing that I would say or do will force them to write honestly or say anything about me. I had a great meeting in Alaska about the stupid war of Biden, which should never have happened. If I convinced Russia to give Moscow as a deal, fake news and their partners, radical leftists and Democrats would say that I made a terrible mistake and concluded a very bad deal, so they are fake news. They should also think about 6 wars. As for the rest, I've just stopped. MAGA, big progress for Russia. Stay in touch, President Guido. First of all, if Trump wants to give Moscow to Ukraine as a deal, I have nothing against it, because Russia is Kyivska and Moscow should belong to Ukraine, without a doubt. But if we set aside the joke, this one is quite interesting. Is there something tangible about these posts? Obviously not, but you can see that Trump cares a lot about public perception of his supporters. That's good. It means that if someone makes certain decisions, including their pressure on Zelensky, for example, or on Ukraine, he will pay attention to what kind of reaction that will cause. Also, Trump posted to his post a mage favoritist, Lorena Bodorova, who says Ukraine should give way to territories. Ukraine should be ready to give way to some of Russia's territories, and the longer the war continues, the more territories they'll lose. So, Trump pre-posted that more likely as he twisted, but never mind, on his social media, so he didn't say it himself, but still, obviously, he agreed with that, obviously, he believes in it. So after talking to Putin, he believes that the situation is a battlefield for Ukraine, a near catastrophe, and Russia is successfully advancing. Putin, in principle, always insists on that absolutely imaginary picture of reality. He already did this in the Kursk region with the help of Trump about, in what evil position Ukraine is there. As a result, when Trump communicated with other people, he realized that everything was not at all so and began to tell already about the big problems in Russia. In this sense, Trump is very influential. What about reality if we do not take any of the propagandas of the time, and reality describes DeepState? In the last 1100 days of the war, the enemy occupied less than 1% of Ukraine's territory. Since November 12, 2022, 118,651 km were occupied by the enemy. To this day, 114,493 km. The enemy has occupied 5 5,842 sq km of Ukrainian territory. This is 0.96781%. Well, that is, these are the numbers after the pause from the entire area of the Ukrainian state to the international border. Fortunately, Katyynivka had great success in the first days of a full-scale invasion, but thanks to the offensive operations in the north of the country in the Kharkov and Kherson regions, it was possible to return most of it, writes DeepState. After November 12, 2022, the enemy continued active offensive actions, which with significant breakthroughs continue until now. Those who do not remember, in the fall an active offensive of the Russians to Bakhmut took place. We hope these numbers will reach our American partners because something about them with mathematics is not very good. This means that on the capture of the territory which Trump wants, according to the media, for Kyiv to give Russia just like that, talk about Donbass, Kremlin has years to go if the button does not explode earlier, which is quite possible. We will talk about this a little later. So the demands of Russia are in absolutely no way connected with the realities on the ground. They come from the nonsense fantasies of Putin, in which Trump believed. Did he believe in them? Because it is convenient for him to believe in them. He would very much like everything to be exactly as Putin says, because then it would be easier to force Ukraine to capitulate. But the reality is completely different, which means it is impossible to force Kyiv to surrender to the Kremlin. Well, probably the brightest post is a direct call for Trump to Zelensky. President of Ukraine Zelensky can put an end to the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue the fight. Remember how it all started? No return of Crimea to Obama, and 12 years ago, without a single shot and no Ukraine joining NATO. Some things never change, Trump wrote. This is, to be honest, an interesting post, and that's why you see something about Donbass and I don't. You see something about destroying territories, and I don't. The post is still bad, of course, since it is pressure on Kyiv to take Moscow's will into account, that is, to be an aggressor and moreover to limit NATO from making a decision about who can and who cannot be accepted into the alliance. Still, they don't include the most dangerous ones from Putin's proposals, or because Trump doesn't see them as acceptable, or because he doesn't want to publicize them yet, understanding that these proposals, catastrophic from his operational point of view, are separately interesting, as he writes that Bama gave Crimea without a single shot. Well, not quite without a single shot, but important, while essentially proposing giving the unoccupied part of Donbass without a single shot. The more parallels these will cause, the more they'll talk about Trump's weakness and how Putin commands him, the less Trump will want to go that way. To summarize this whole F***CKS**T, Trump is trying to sell at least something to someone. The media is trying to sell the story that he actually failed in Alaska. This is not true, he failed completely. Putin ate him only not for lunch, as Kamala Harris predicted, and even before lunch, the lunch had to be cancelled. To sell the story that he actually failed in Ukraine, Kamala Harris must capitulate to Russia to sell the story that it's actually their only chance to stop killing each other. To sell the story to Europeans that without it they won't do anything. And the problem with him is that this is complete nonsense that only exists in his fantasies, except for the fact that he is truly one of few chances to save Russia from the suicide war that she started and continues. If you ask me whether I'm worried about what's going to happen today, I'll answer honestly, a bit, but not deeply. I just don't see a map of Trump. In my opinion, he's just trying to pull off the classic American fake news deal until you make it. And at the same time, he's lying to Russia, to Ukraine, to the Americans, and even to himself. His intensity of protests these past days have been sheltered in quite loud nonsense, then to pressure Russia, perhaps after some time of direct pressure on Ukraine. What I think the situation we've in now reminds us of February. Trump is pushing anyone you can push to keep up with the quick doers, anyone. But a lot has changed since February. First, Ukraine has already tried to exist without American aid at all, not at will. And it turned out to be difficult, of course, but not mortal. Secondly, Europe has greatly increased its muscles, like the Ukrainian defense industry. It's still not enough to completely stop the Russian offensive and win this war, but still much, much more of these muscles than there was in February. America is replaced as a resource source and now remains only an arms trader. People who leave this deal will first be struck by the US and Trump himself, who, when countries buy US weapons from Ukraine, was very proud of himself. Third, Trump has made peace with many European countries and has made beneficial for him tariff deals. Quarrel with them now would zero out everything made. Fourth, over the past half a year, loyalty even to those who treated Trump well has gone down. The claim that he's too soft with Putin sounds more and more often, even among Republicans. And one's own problems, the Epstein list and so on, push things more and more. And fifth, there's little surprise left for the Kremlin. Trump is now showing Putin not because of a loyal relationship, but because, as it seems to Trump, the situation is hopeless. Putin irritates Trump more and more. And I doubt that Putin will again bring his face to the table in Alaska without giving him anything at all. And that's exactly why I explain Trump's rhetoric to you carefully, at least by his standards. He doesn't require it, he suppresses it. He follows a path toward retreat, saying there will be nothing to force Zelensky into. That's of course a lie, and that's exactly what the US president is doing now. But still, the rhetoric is careful. We'll see what happens. I'm not a prophet and not even an American and not a psychiatrician to analyze the actions of narcissists and sociopaths. Trump's meeting with Zelensky is scheduled for later this evening at 8 p.m. Kyiv time today and with European leaders after 10 p.m. Will the employees of the White House get free food this time? We'll see. The main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reported a serious wound on Russian General Obashev, deputy to the Northern Commanding Group. According to the main directorate, on the night of August 16-17, Ukrainian units struck the enemy colonies on the Rysk-Komutovka highway in the Kursk region. As a result of the attack, the general suffered serious injuries. Obashev was urgently delivered to a central clinic hospital of the name of Vishnevsky in Moscow by military transport aircraft. According to the department, his arm and leg were amputated. General, a lieutenant of Russian armed forces, has been holding a position of deputy to the commanding group of the Army North, which conducts combat actions against Ukraine on the territory of the Lugansk region. Earlier, he commanded the 2nd Guard Combined Army of the Central Military District. Obashev is considered one of the few generals to have retained a high position after the large-scale losses of the Russian army on the front. Well, we wish him to die earlier. The publication Militarily tells about the Ukrainian missile Flamingo and brings the details of the ballistic missile that appeared in Ukraine. Later that evening, on August 17, 1925, the network spread the news that Ukraine has introduced the Flamingo long-range missile with a range of 3,000 kilometers. The photo of 2 such missiles was captured by the correspondent Yefrem Lukatsky, who shot them for Associated Press. His comments about them were quite limited. The main one was already a series of products from the company Farpaint, which developed striking drone FP1, which successfully strikes objects in Russia. He did not provide any other information, but the visual appearance can already say a lot about the missile itself. The missile has a long cylindrical core, a gondola of a jet engine. Its air intake is located in the end part of the fuselage above. The missile's carrying wings is rectangular, located about in the center part of the fuselage, the middle plan. The core ring is an X-type or H-type, it's up to you. The launch takes place from a ground launch unit in the form of a trailer, which has directives for a free pass of the missile's accelerator. Flamingo's pictures immediately compared it to the Krotata Rokta FP5 project by Melonian. We won't, writes Militarily, hear various suspicions, but will bring in its characteristics, which, according to visual resembling, evaluate what a Ukrainian missile can look like. The working range is up to 3,000 kilometers. The flight altitude is up to 5. The useful load is up to 1,000 kilograms. The maximum flight time is 4 hours. The maximum speed is 950 kilometers per hour. The cruiser speed is 850-900 kilometers per hour. The FP5 has a maximum takeoff mass of 6,000 kilometers, a wingspan of 6,000. It is controlled with the help of a protected GPS, JNNS, CPI, and INS systems. Together with another domestic cruise missile, the military Neptune, which, in the long version, has a range of 1,000 kilometers, such a weapon can have a significant influence on the number and quality of strikes on Russian military and industrial objects. Though, of course, with such a distance the Russian Shads of the GRP of Iran, they will intercept directly on the enterprise of the producers in Alabuga and Izhevsk. Now Ukrainian long-range drones are being taken there, but their combat unit is significantly less, and therefore it has not yet been possible to completely destroy the production. In general, the Ukrainian ballistic is a separate, insanely interesting topic, which I hope we can discuss in the near future when we see its use, because it can change the situation very significantly, since the main advantage of Russia from the point of view of long-range strikes is, of course, the presence of a missile in it. Z-Channel Vladimir Grubnik complained that the situation is getting seriously worse, and the state is constantly trying to pretend that no war is existent. This position is huge for the country's SB. The SVO is something the Ministry of Defense is doing somewhere there and which should not penetrate into the current Russian reality. This is to a certain degree the state's position. They start thinking, but if these people who wiped one out 3 days ago now say the other, maybe they don't need this state at all, maybe they'll handle it without me, maybe our ministry or professional department. Knows it better. According to Zetnik, the state is hiding the truth about the real situation from the most important question of the SVO. Instead, it uses a policy of humiliating public attention and bringing only positive information to the public. This helps to hide the scale of real problems in the army, for example, corruption, Zetnik believes. What did our citizens get fed? Mostly about the Ministry of Defense? That's it. War civilization, military correspondent, volunteers, humanitarian groups. They said, well, they're thefting. Well, they just stole the army. What did they tell us? Well, there are wise people at the top. They'll figure it out without you. Don't talk too much about it, just mind your own business, he said. But that would harm the army, and because of that, people actually die. A certain amount of time has passed, and the Ministry of Defense makes massive withdrawals and arrests. People are covering for corruption and the growth of budgetary funds. He says, yes, but what a failed situation it was. Also, his comrades diversified, pointing out the lack of skilled soldiers and the low level of Russian servicemen's training. A serious shortage of people, and not just a shortage of people, but a shortage of personnel, just a monstrous number. I mean serious specialists, small specialists, technical specialists. This is a very serious problem. It means question of personnel training. For example, how personnel training is being carried out now, I don't know. This is, well, if I start talking about this itself, it will become discreditation. But discreditation not in the sense that I'm talking about this, but the fact that this is happening now. Is it not discreditation? In general, it is the system itself. In other words, preparing a person for assault actions in a week is serious, from zero, just yes, who came from a civilian. Video DHB 79th DHBur publishes a video from the liberated Zolotyy well. The paratroopers have cleared the village from the occupiers and established full control. The fighters have stopped the attempt to break through the enemy in the Dobropolye area, allowing the invaders to advance further. Stabilization actions in this direction continue. As we can see, more and more data appears confirming, in fact, that this breakthrough, which took place either completely eliminated or partially eliminated, but with a cut into the boiler of Russian soldiers. The tactical aviation of the air forces of the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed the bridges and pontoon bridgeheads of the Russians in the Kursk region. A video with strikes was published by the Telegram channel, Patsenchnik. The strike was made near the settlement of Zivane using American high-precision planning bombs JDAMR, GBU-62 and SDB GBU-39. These routes were used by the enemy to move military equipment through reservoirs, but due to their destruction, the range will be significantly reduced, which will require additional effort from the Russians to arrange new crossings. Konstantin Mashovets provides analysis of the front, noting the main directions and trends that are on them. Let's briefly get acquainted with what is happening right now on the line of combat contact. In the Lemensk direction, Mashovets writes, Russia's forward units, as a result of active assault actions, have advanced southeastern from the village of Torskoye in the Lesnoy Massivia to the Serblyansk forestry about 4 square kilometers. In turn, the forward units of Ukrainian armed forces eliminated on the bank of the river Cherny Zherobets the area of infiltration by several assault groups of the enemy, who managed to cross the river in the area of the village of Zerchnya. Moreover, Ukrainian armed forces continue to successfully reflect the attacks of Russian forward assault units. They hold the villages of Karpivka, positions on the Nitrius River, and the area of the northern village of Redkodup. The attack of Russian assault groups in the direction of Grekivka-Drezhilubivka is also unsuccessful for Russia, Mashovets notes. In the Slavyansk direction, also the Seversk one, as I actually predicted, Mashovets writes, Russian armed forces began to intensify the southern face of the Seversk salient. Russian units operating in small infantry groups managed to advance up to 1 kilometer near Ivanodarievka, taking the last one. However, their previous attempts to advance along the northern bank of the Sakya-Plotva River turned out to be ineffective. Russian attacks toward Verkhnykamenskoye and Severskoye in the area of the village of Vyimka were also unsuccessful. According to local residents, Russia is currently unable to break through to the defense depth of Ukrainian armed forces. Even in the tactical zone, an offensive is forced to be made aimed at eliminating the Seversky bridgehead, by literally pushing forward units at Ukrainian armed forces from their positions in a number of areas in this direction. The Russian army units, despite their significant superiority in the number of conditional combat-capable infantry over Ukrainian troops, are forced to actively use an infiltration method in this direction. On the Kramatorsk direction, Mashovets pays attention. The forward units of the Russian army have advanced in the direction of Klishivka, Pridichina, Andriivka, Belaya Hora, reaching this area to the channel Seversky Donetsk Donbas. Obvious forward units of Ukrainian armed forces deliberately left their positions behind the channel because of the obvious flank threat to them from the south, where the Russian units have previously been able to advance to Verkhnidliivka and are already fighting for the village of Belaya Hora. At the same time, Russian attacks in the area of Chasov Yar, as well as from the north of it in the direction of Kalinovka, Veryubovka, and Chasov Yarmeyskoy, have not yet brought a result. After taking several forest landings in the north of the city, Russia persistently attacks in the direction of Mayskoy, but has not yet been able to hold on to. Attacks on Veryubovka, that is, in the direction of Druzhkovka, are also not very successful yet. On Toretsk, Russia continues to persistently attack in the direction of Oleksandr Shulgin and is trying to break through and secure itself in the White Mountain. According to me, Russia's Mashovets have not yet captured any of these villages, although Deep State shows that the White Mountain is already in the gray zone. As far as I know, writes the Russian army assault groups, they have advanced from the northeast at a distance of up to a kilometer to the road that leads from the White Mountain to Kurdyumivka and to the river Richishka to Amiko. A much more serious situation looks south of the Lebenbek Reservoir, where Russian forces are trying to capture the village of Katerynivka from the south. At the moment, there are persistent counterattacks there. Ukrainian armed forces are counterattacking time after time. So far, Russia has taken only 2 tree lines south of the village and has taken it out of its western part. It's necessary to say separately that Azov reports that he managed to stop the Russians in Katerynivka. The units of the 12th Brigade Azov have stopped the assault pressure of the Russians, who tried to secure themselves near the settlement of Katerynivka. In the Toretsk direction, the video with the strike publicized the press service of the brigade, so the information of Mashovets is confirmed in this regard. Creating assault actions, the article militarily vrak, that is, Russia has brought armored vehicles to support the advancing infantry in an attempt to land in Katerynivka. Despite the dynamics of the assault, defenders of the Azov brigade, using drones, have started to bring equipment to the Russians so they have no chance to evacuate. At the same time, after the equipment was destroyed, the drone brigades began hunting the remnants of Russian occupiers, who, due to the lack of support, have started chaotic search for shelter. According to Deep State, Russian troops are not leaving any attempts to capture this settlement and carry out constant attacks on Ukrainian defenders. Now let's continue with Mashovets' analysis. The troops that infiltrated into the northern part of Sh Cherbanivka and several small infantry groups of the Russian armed forces seem to still be there. They obviously hope to be hit from the south or from the side of Novosibirsk or from the Toretsk. Apparently, this will rather come out among those now attacking Katerynivka, writes Mashovets. On the other hand, Russian units are persistently fighting in the Yablonivka area near Oleksandr Kalinov. Apparently, though, he managed to nearly occupy Yablonivka, reaching the village of Bychak, but to secure on the N12 road leading to Kostianivka from the south, and to completely bypass the water reservoir from the northwest has not yet been possible. Russia is showing activity over the Dobropolye direction. In particular, the Russian armed forces are attacking in the direction of Novolenovka-Rusinyar, as well as trying to bypass Vladimirivka from the east. In the area of Rusinyar, there was a counterattack, and the Russian armed forces advanced, but in the area of Vladimirovka, Russia managed to break through to the new Stavka in the east of the village. In the light of the recent events in the Dobropolye direction, it is obvious, writes Mashovets, that the command of the 8th Army of Russian Armed Forces aims to support the 51st Army, forced to engage in persistent fighting for the hold of a fairly short borderline of its incursion northward between the already repelled Ukrainian armed forces, Nikanorovka and Novotoretsk. The persistent attack of the 8th Army of Russian Armed Forces around Vladimirovka clearly indicates the desire of its command to help its left neighboring through the creation of a flank threat to the Ukrainian units that tighten this borderline in the area of Shakhov, Hankovka, and Vladimirovka. However, the problem for Russian armed forces, writes Mashovets, is that Russian armed forces tighten Semigorlivina faster than forward units of the Russian army bypass Vladimirovka. For the past 3 days, Russian armed forces attacked from the side of Ivanivka and Belitskoy, and eventually hit Dorozhnaya and Nikanorovka, pushing back Russian assault groups that pushed to the east between Belitskoy and Rodinskoy. In general, the area of Russian armed forces encirclement toward the north of Tsivorovanovotoretskoy over the course of the prescribed period has essentially begun to fragment. In Kucherov-Zaru, apparently, a couple of Russian assault units are still encircled. The front line broke through from the south, and between Novaya Shakhovna and Shakhovna, Russia is holding the remnants of its former tactical superiority, meaning a 2.5-kilometer wide line. The rest of the former territory is under very threatening invasion, and this phrase Mashovets actually means cleared. In the Sumy region, main actions from the western flank started with a forward assault group of the Russian army from Dobropilye-Kramatorsk. Then they drove out the Russian armed forces from Veseloy from the positions near Gruzovskoy. Then they attacked the base of the incursion toward Ivanivka-Nikanorovka. Taking the last strike, then they drove out the Russian armed forces from Zolotyy Kolodyaz. At the moment, obviously, the command of the 51st Russian Army, given the situation, will be forced, as I predicted. Mashovets writes, to return to the main plan, that is, to focus on the offensive in the Rodinskoy area, that is, to the problem of capturing Pokrovsk-Mianora. As for Pokrovsk itself, Mashovets notes, in the southwest of Pokrovsk itself, Russian armed forces continue attacking persistently in the Udichnaya village, trying to break through to the north between it and Malods. In just under a couple of days, their assault groups managed to to advance toward Malotsk at 200-300 meters along the tree lines located southwest of the Yudzhnaya village. In turn, Russian forces are enlisting persistent fighting in the southwestern outskirts of Pokrovsk in order to hold their forward assault groups in the village of Zverevoy until it's impossible to shoot them out of there. The Russian armed forces continue assaulting Rodinskoye and the neighboring Krasny Liman. At the moment, it's impossible to trust the village, as several assault groups managed to break through to it in the northeast, but then again, they were pushed out the same way, in a circle. That is to say, the battles in Podstupy and in Rodinskoye themselves continue, but the northern villages of Ukrainian armed forces apparently managed to push Russia out of a couple of tree lines and clean up the so-called infiltration area of small infantry groups that managed to reach the road to Pokrovsk-Dobropolye. In the area between Rodinskoye and Beletsky, in the South-Donetsk direction, Mashovets notes, Russia is also advancing with the forces of the army of the composition of its group of troops east, having certain successes. In particular, several assault groups obviously were able to break through from the Green GF of the village of Iskra, but after the counterattack of Ukrainian armed forces, they were either destroyed or went back. That's why they talked to you yesterday, but then again, there was infiltration. At the moment, the Russian forward units probably have secured northeastern Iskra in several tree lines or south of the Volch River, and it's quite possible 2 or 3 small assault groups of the Russian armed forces would be there in the village itself. Obviously, the command of the 5th Army of the Russian Armed Forces aims to reach the border of Trinovo and Kamyshevaha from the south. Persistently attacks in the direction of Timirovka, Zaporizhia, and Zelenaya Polia, Novogorivka. It is slow, but it is advancing toward the north of the junction of the 3 regions of Ukraine, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia. At the moment, Ukrainian armed forces are delaying the border of Zaporizhia and Novogorivka, but Russia managed to get a few kilometers east of Zaporizhia. Moreover, Russian armed forces were able to advance to Kamyshevac from the side of Volnovopol. Well, now let's move on to the Russian military and their disappointments. Deputy of the Krasnoyarsk Krai, a participant of the SVO, veteran of combat actions Vechtel Vladimir, born in 1984, wrote an appeal in which he said that he was not allowed to hold a meeting about the problems of soldiers at the front due to COVID restrictions. That is not a problem due to COVID restrictions. They forbidden to hold a meeting about COVID restrictions. Let's listen to how he complains. Today we are working in the Vermakovsky district. There are a lot of questions accumulated there. For me, as a deputy, as a participant of a special military operation, veterans of combat actions, questions related to wise people, contracts, payments, benefits, there are also missing people who require the help of my attention for their decision. The administration of 2 meetings was informed in advance about the village of Vermakovsky and the village of Minga, but they were refused. Mr. Mikhail Vygorsky made a bet on the COVID restrictions and refused to meet with us. However, today, the day of the village of Semenyukov, 25 kilometers from Vermakovsky, takes place. COVID restrictions do not spread there. Not far from Vermakovsky is the city of Medusinsk. The second day, the form of Russian strong cities takes place. COVID restrictions do not spread there either. On the face of the double power, on the one hand, they say that we are for people and for people, but on the other hand, serious matters that arise before the deputies of the legislation meeting, they do not allow to take place in the houses of culture. Well, the homeland will always leave you, son. Another Russian military, now a deputy, could face this. And some were lucky, much less. They were sent not to the hunt, but to the pit. A serviceman, Tabov Tagyr Taibovich, recorded a video message saying his life is in danger. Taibovich is in service in the 503rd Motorized Rifle Regiment, Military Unit 753-94. He previously said his short-term contract ended long ago, but they don't plan to fire him. Moreover, a man has serious health problems. Today it was announced, or rather yesterday, that the command ignores his condition and plans to transfer a serviceman to an assault unit. Video brings the Telegram channel, so don't expect good news. Via Tabutra Grigorievna Ibovich, they brought me to the pit of epilepsy, and now they are sending me to the 3rd Battalion of the Assault Company. To the FSB employees, I appeal for this whole video to go online completely. I've been doing nothing for a long time, and now I'm going from epilepsy to psychiatric hospital. Here's the pit. They'll come now, close the telephone, and if this video gets posted, I ask you to spread it as much as possible. I have epilepsy attacks, my father doesn't walk, my mother has oncology, my father has surgery, and I have problems with epilepsy in my assault unit. Well, that's all for today. We'll see each other in the evening. Until next time, take care, bye.